Okay, guys. So today, as you know, we are talking about the virtue of chastity, and we're just going to cover some basics of the virtue and how important this is to practice in our lives, and why it's practical to do so. So in order to understand the virtue of chastity, we first have to kind of talk about body language, because body language is a huge component of understanding the virtue. So as you know, we are created as spiritual and physical beings. We're not one or the other. So because we're both, we don't just communicate verbally, we also communicate non-verbally. So, like, how can you tell if someone is happy, if they're sad, if they're tired? You can tell through the way that they express themselves through their body, which, as you know, is body language. So, because we can communicate through our bodies, just as we can, speak truth or lies through our verbal communication, we can also speak truth or lies through our bodies, and therefore we can speak truth or lies through our sexuality. So, one thing that people think is like really shocking whenever I do chastity talks is when I say that sex is good. A lot of people are really shocked by that, because so many people, when they think of the virtue of chastity, they think of this like prudish Victorian era kind of mentality that just thinks that all sex is bad and that it's this terrible thing. Well, it's not, because God created it. And we look in the book of Genesis, after, all these things that God created, it says, and it was good. And God created sex, so God created it good. The only time that it's not good is when it's taken outside of God's design. So, so that is something that a lot of people find very shocking. And so, because God created it with a purpose in mind, with a design, there are two components to sex, two reasons why it is good. It is created for the procreation of children and the education of children, as well as the union of spouses. Notice I said the union of spouses. Not the union of two people who are in a committed relationship, not the union of two strangers, but the union of spouses, because sex is created for marriage. And we're going to go into a little bit of why that's so important. So, I'm just going to hold this up. Who can tell me what this is?
Spatula.
A spatula. And what is a spatula used for?
Cooking.
Cooking. So you can use it to flip things. A lot of things that you can do in the kitchen with a spatula. So let's say that you and I want to go play baseball, and we couldn't find a bat, and so we went outside, and I was like, you know what? I have a spatula. This will do. Like, let's go play baseball. And you threw the ball at me, and I swung my spatula, and I hit the ball. What do you think would happen to my spatula? Anyone?
It would break.
It would break, exactly. And why would it break?
It's not made for baseball.
Exactly. It's not made for baseball. It is being used contrary to its purpose. So, it's the same thing with sex. Like, whenever we use it outside of its intended purpose, it hurts it. We hurt ourselves whenever we engage in sexual activity outside of marriage, because that's not what it was designed for. And, so a lot of people kind of roll their eyes like whenever they hear this, because about like 85% of Americans don't really see anything wrong with engaging in sexual activity outside of marriage. And I mean, that's not really surprising, because we look at the media and everything, and everyone is just kind of like, it's, everyone's doing it, so they don't really think that that's that shocking. So the modern dating world would say that chastity is like this outdated mentality, but the modern dating world, you look at their divorce rate, it's also 50%. So that should really tell us something about how, accurate they are. We'll just go into the theology of like why sex is made for marriage and why chastity is so important. So we're just going to cover this real quick. So in the wedding vows, there are 4 components to the wedding vows. It is free, total, faithful, fruitful. Okay, so these 4 components are all elements of true love. So in the wedding vows, so couples will promise to love each other freely. So that means, I promise to love you, and I'm loving you out of my own free will. No one's holding a gun to my head. No one is saying like, oh, like, you have to love this person, and if you like love this person, I'm going to give you like $20,000. Like, no, there's no price. Like, you are loving this person freely out of your own will because you love them authentically. So total means that you are giving yourself completely to this person. You are giving yourself completely to this person without reservation, only them. Faithful, it means that you're loving that person exclusively, that person, only them. You promise to love Mike, not Mike, Bill, Bob, and Joe, just Mike. So, And then the fourth component is fruitful. And fruitful means that your love bears fruit. So like being open to children. So in order for married love to be authentic, it has to have all four of these characteristics. If any of them were taken out of the equation, it would be a pretty pathetic excuse for love. So if the free element was missing, that would be like saying, yeah, I love you, but I only love you because this person is giving me like $20,000 to love you. Or if the total aspect was missing, it would be like saying, yeah, I love you with like 70% of my heart. That should be good enough, right? Yeah, that sounds ridiculous, I know. Or that would be like saying, yeah, you're the one for me, but so is Bill, Bob, and Joe. No one would want to hear that. Like, if someone was to tell you that, you'd think they were crazy. Right? Yeah. You definitely think they were crazy. And then if the fruitful aspect was missing, it would be like saying, yes, I love you, but not enough to raise a child with you. Or, yes, I love you, but I think like one of you is good enough. There shouldn't be a bunch of little yous running around. So those four components, free, total, faithful, and fruitful, that's also how Christ loves us. That is how Christ loves his bride, the church. He loves, and this love can be expressed most perfectly with Christ's love on the cross. So we look at the cross and we see that Christ has given himself to his bride totally and freely. He like when in scripture when it says, I lay down my life on my own accord. Like no one is holding a gun to his head, no one is making him doing it. He freely lays down his life for us. He does this totally. He gives himself completely to us. He's not holding anything back, any part of himself back. He's giving himself totally to us. Faithfully, he's giving himself to only us. He's not being selfish with that. And fruitfully, because his love bears fruit. His love bears fruit in the form of his bride, the church. And because he saves us and his redeeming love. So, like I was saying with our body language, so we're going to talk in the body language of sex. Our bodies speak a language. And this is something that I didn't know until like probably my freshman year of college, which I thought was like the coolest thing, is that whenever a couple consummates their marriage or they have sex within marriage, they're actually renewing their wedding vows. Yeah, I know. I didn't know that for the longest time. So every time they have sex, they are renewing their wedding vows. And that's really important because that means that sex is like a sacrament. It's sacramental. And so if you were to take out any one of the four components, that would be kind of tarnishing the sacrament. And like Scott Hahn in his book Rome Sweet Home, he says something really interesting that really struck me when I read it. He said, well, he was talking about like birth control and how that withholds the total and fruitful aspects. And if you were to use like birth control in marriage, because that's a sacrament, it would be tarnishing the sacrament. And it would be like if you received the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ, and you chewed it up, spit it on the ground, and stomped all over it. I know. Yeah. It really makes you think when you put it that way. So, and just if anyone's confused right now, we don't have time to go into this, but we'll do this in another session where we talk more about like birth control and natural family planning. And natural family planning is what the church uses, which also like couples practice chastity within marriage through natural family planning. And just, to go back to the divorce rates real quick. So couples that use birth control, their divorce rate is 50%. Couples that use natural family planning, which includes chastity within marriage, who knows how high their divorce rate is? It's less than 2%. I know. So that's a huge difference. And that should really tell us something about how important, practicing chastity is. So, okay, so back to how sex is sacramental. So even if a couple is engaging in sex outside of marriage, like, that is also a lie. Because love, in order to be authentic and to be real, it has to be rooted in truth. So if a couple is having sex outside of marriage, like their bodies are speaking married love, but their level of commitment is not there. So they're not really aligned with each other. And also because our bodies reveal God. Because we're created in the image and likeness of God. So like our bodies are meant to reveal God and to reveal his love. And so because they reveal God, so in Theology of the Body, John Paul II talks about something called the prophecy of the body. So we look at the prophecy of the body in the Old Testament, and the prophets were chosen by God to speak on his behalf. So, because of this, our body language doesn't just speak on our behalf, but on behalf of God. So, there, as you know, there were like false prophets and then true prophets. And so John Paul II talks about like couples, and he says that with our bodies, we can be false prophets or true prophets. So if we are being true prophets, our bodies are expressing truth. They're expressing true love. And that is the love that Christ loves his church with. That is the love of the Trinity. That is free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Okay, so we talked about the prophecy of the body. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about like chastity versus abstinence. So that's not actually the same thing. Abstinence is just abstaining from sex, but doing everything else. Chastity is more than just abstaining from sex. It's actually a purification of our desires, a purification of our hearts. And why would we need this purification? Well, when we look back at the beginning, we look to the fall, and we see that before the fall of Adam and Eve, they were naked without shame. They were able to look at one another with this pure love. They saw the other completely naked, but they saw them as a person to be loved, not a person to be used. So after the fall, after they committed the sin and they chose something else besides God, all of a sudden they lost this divine vision. They lost that ability to look at the other person as purely someone to be loved. Instead, what entered the world was concupiscence, and they looked at the other person as someone to be used. And that's why they covered up their bodies. That's why they were so ashamed, and they realized they were naked, because they saw that was something beautiful that needed to be covered up and needed to be hidden, because they knew that the other was looking at them with lust. And lust is the sexual desire apart from God's plan of love. It's a selfish desire to please oneself, and it treats someone as an object. It treats them as someone to be used rather than to be loved. So lust is the objectification of another. It is an illusion of love, and it's actually the enemy of love. And John Paul II, a really great quote by him, he actually says that the opposite of love is not hate, it's use. So how do we combat this? Because this is an enemy to love, and we're made for love. So how can we combat this? Through the virtue of chastity. So the catechism, this is my all-time favorite line in the entire catechism. Chastity includes an apprenticeship in self-mastery, which is training in human freedom. The alternative is clear. Either man governs his passions and finds peace, or he lets himself be dominated by them and becomes unhappy. So that's paragraph 2339, if you want to go check that out and kind of pray with that. So we are only able to give what we have control over. Because how can you give something that you don't have? So if you have complete control and mastery of yourself, you're able to give yourself that much more. So our freedom, it can be measured by our capacity to love, and our capacity to love only increases with the virtue of chastity. So it kind of reminds me of the line from Mumford & Sons song, Sigh No More. It says, "Love will not dismay you, enslave or betray you, it will set you free." Chastity is not a list of no's, it's a list of yeses to love. Chastity teaches us how to love. It also frees us to know if we're being loved or not. So I know, like, for me, when I was in high school, and I was your guys' ages, I was in high school, and, like, I'd go on a date with a guy, and everything was going great, and then all of a sudden, like, when we talk about, like, sex and stuff, I would say, like, oh, well, I think that sex is for marriage. And then all of a sudden, I never hear from him again. Or, like, I just get ghosted. And it was terrible, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I'd find out later on from one of his friends, oh, it's because they'd be like, oh, he stopped talking to you because he knows, like, you're not going to sleep with him. And that was really hard for me. But at the same time, I was at so much peace because it kind of showed me, like, this is not authentic love. Like, I'm protecting myself from being used, because if that person really loved me for me and not what they could get out of me, then they would wait. Like, waiting wouldn't be a problem, because they would just want to be with me, not, you know, what they could get out of me. So it allows us to know if we're being loved or not. Also, you know, there's a lot of things with chastity that, you know, then we don't really have to worry about if we practice chastity. Like, we don't have to be like, oh, did I get this person pregnant? Or am I pregnant? Or, you know, or does this person, do I have STDs? Did I get STDs from this person? You don't have to worry about any of that. And that's also just a huge weight lifted off of your shoulders. Because I remember, like, a lot of my friends in high school, they'd be, like, worrying about this stuff all the time. And, like, I would think, I'm really glad I don't have to worry about this. Like, it's so freeing. Because in married love, you know, if I end up pregnant because of my husband, that's like very different because we're in this lifetime commitment together and children are designed for marriage. So it wouldn't be that stressful. So, like I said, chastity, God has a design for sexuality, and chastity is what helps us keep that design intact. A lot of times I get the question, like, how far is too far? And this is a question I get a lot. And my response to that question would be that the question shouldn't be, that shouldn't be the question that we're asking. The question shouldn't be, how far can I get to sin? The question should be, how far can I go towards love? How far can I bring this person towards love? How far can I bring this person towards the love of Christ? So that's just something that I want you guys to think about. It shouldn't be about how far you can bring someone to sin and how far you can bring someone to death, but how far you can bring someone to love and to life. Okay.